Toledo was stalked for years by the King of Castile and Leon, Alfonso VI, who burned crops and demanded tributes from its Muslim leaders. Finally, in 1085, the city surrendered, and the Christian king entered victorious without struggle after signing on the capitulations that would preserve the places of Islamic worship, including the main mosque. Initial religious tolerance allowed the majority of the population to stay, preserve their assets, and practice their beliefs. King Alfonso VI proclaimed himself emperor of two religions, but soon after, the French Archbishop of Toledo, Bernardo de Suavitat, consecrated the major mosque to Christianity, including what was agreed with the consent of the king, although a famous legend says otherwise. The king, great benefactor of the Cluny, gave the castle to this order of San Servando for the defense of the city. He also gave privileges to the Franks, who controlled the main religious positions, the monasteries, and the commerce with the north. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the Islamic population, not yet Christianized, Christians still culturally Arabized, the Mozarabs, new Christians coming from the north, and Jews all lived together. This created a cultural exchange that shaped its appearance and idiosyncrasy. These are the centuries of the Mudéjar, the translations, and impetus for the cathedral. The Western Christian architecture was based on the Roman Basilica, which was a public space for civil use with a rectangular plan and a head for authorities. In general, the Western churches had a plan shaped as a basilica from early Christian times to Romanesque. But when the churches became small, they tended to expand by adding side aisles separated by rows of columns with arches that supported the roof. To solve the lighting in the central nave, it had to be raised enough on the sides to leave windows above. This height was not compatible with barrel vault roofs made of stone because of the weight. This conflict of interest was resolved with the evolution of architecture that went from basilica-form to cruciform and from Romanesque to Gothic. These medieval architectural styles, Romanesque and Gothic, entered the Iberian Peninsula from current-day France, although there were always native solutions. Although most of the Mudéjar churches of Toledo are Romanesque, the cathedral was created in a Gothic style by the decision of Archbishop Jiménez de Rada, educated in Paris, who attracted architects and sculptors from northern Europe to Toledo. Perhaps that is why the French writer Maurice Barrès said that the cathedral was the best furnished place in the world. Given its immense artistic wealth, it deserves a separate video, which can be found on this same channel. Apart from the cathedral, there is another great Gothic monument of Toledo, the monastery of San Juan de los Reyes. Its construction by Juan Guas was commissioned by the Catholic kings at the end of the 15th century. The Franciscan monastery included a church, royal apartments, and a cemetery for the monks' burial, which finally took place in Granada. Juan Guas was born in Brittany, traveled to Toledo with his father accompanying the Flemish sculptors who came to work on the door of the lions of the cathedral. Unfortunately, the original altarpiece and the ashlar masonry of the church, the convent, and a great part of its valuable library were destroyed by the Napoleonic troops. We are left with the church and its beautiful cloister, both of late Gothic style. The church's exterior has very vertical and austere facades in granite masonry, decorated in a characteristic way with vertical and horizontal iron tracery, formed by chains that represent the liberation of Christians after the conquests of Malaga and Baeza. Its octagonal dome, crowned with Gothic pinnacles, rises above the church and skyline of the city. The Calvary located on the facade is a magnificent work by Enrique Egas and is located next to the entrance of the sacristy, whose interior vaults are Germanic style with florons in the keys. The temple floor plan is in the shape of a Latin cross with arms that do not protrude from the single central nave, and with 4 bodies, lateral chapels, and remarkable pulpits as it corresponds to the churches of Franciscan preaching. An epigraph of Latin surrounds the temple and makes reference to its foundation. The decorative iconography is repetitive with models of shields and eagles as a symbol of St. John, along with crowns, yokes, arrows, and the letters Y and F, the first initials of the names of the kings. Simon de Colonia contributed to the dome and the main chapel, which have a flamboyant Gothic style with palm fronds. The altarpiece that we see today, work of Comantes, was taken from Santa Cruz. The extremely beautiful cloister of San Juan de los Reyes is originally credited to the Egas brothers. It highlights the tracery and sculptural work in limestone of the lower cloister, typical of late Gothic period, with ribbed vault on the ceilings. The upper cloister, surrounded by mixed linear arches or covered with neo-mudéjar coffered ceilings in wood painted with heraldic and epigraphic symbols of the initials of Isabel and Fernando. It was reconstructed by Melida along with the cresting and gargoyles at the end of the 19th century based on the few remains of the original mudéjar ceiling burnt in 1812. The staircase is attributed to Covarrubias, who undoubtedly was the creator of the vault. The front of the church, from the early 17th century, is the work of Monegro. Cardinal Cisneros was educated here as a Franciscan novice. The Cordovan savants, welcomed in Toledo after the fall of the Caliphate in the 11th century, brought with them knowledge of the ancient sciences, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and alchemy. Part of the immense library of Al-Hakam II, with copies in Arabic made in Damascus and Baghdad, arrived in the court of King Al-Mamun of Toledo's Taifa. It also incorporated the developments that the Islamic world had made of these disciplines, having assimilated in its expansion the Persian and Indian cultures. Translations from Arabic to Latin had been made occasionally in various medieval monasteries, but it was in Toledo in the 12th century where the translations were organized and continued. In Toledo, they spoke Arabic, Latin, Hebrew, and other Romance languages. There were the scientific books written in Arabic, and the incipient European universities needed to expand the branches of knowledge, which until then had focused on theology. The promoter of everything was the Archbishop Raimundo of Toledo, French from the Cluny order, whose network of monasteries connected Europe with those of the St. James Way. Even though Toledo was very far away, the books were there, and so they could be translated there. In this way, the Islamic world linked East and West at that time, and knowledge passed to Europe, which had been semi-culturally empty since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The beneficiaries were mainly current-day France, England, and Italy, that is to say, the places with nascent universities, Bologna, Paris, and Oxford. In Spain, the university begins in the 13th century in Palencia and shortly after in Salamanca. It is the century of the consecration of Castilian as a cultural language. that it again had an important center in Toledo, in the court of Alfonso X the Wise, where translations were continued and their own treaties were drawn up. The importance of what we now call Toledo School of Translators was only discovered in the 19th century, thanks to the research of the Frenchman Aimable Jourdan. The number of translations made was enormous. The topics addressed were philosophy, theology, mathematics, botany, chemistry, medicine. Numerous classical works of Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen, and Euclid, whose original Greek had been lost, were recovered. The main translators who traveled to Toledo were Juan Hispalense, Gerardo de Cremona, Gundi Salvo, Miguel Scoto, Juan Avendeth, Hermann the German, and Hermann the Dalmatian. Here are some examples of works translated from Arabic that were key in later Western knowledge. The Treatise of Simple Medicines of Ibn Wafid of the 11th century, the astronomical tables of Azarkiel, in which the ones by Alfonso X were based, and later used by Copernicus. The Canon of Medicine of Avicenna, Persian scholar, connoisseur of Galen. The Book of the Causes and Processes of Al-Kundi, scholar of alchemy, astrology, and optics, educated in Baghdad in the 9th century. Philosophical works of Al-Farabi and Al-Ghazal, experts in Plato and Aristotle through the House of Wisdom of Baghdad. These authors also made treatises of scientists, which is why they served the basis of the harmonization of reason and faith of the Western scholastic philosophy that in turn served as the foundation of humanism. The Almagest of Ptolemy, treatise on astronomy, translated from Arabic by Gerardo de Cremona, who traveled to Toledo looking for this book and stayed there all his life, eventually translating almost 90 treatises. Treatise of Al-Khwarizmi of the 9th century, Arithmetic and Algebra, which focused the Greek and Indian sciences and contained the most advanced astronomical and trigonometric tables of the time. It was an Arab version brought from Cordoba to England that introduced trigonometry in the West. Liber Algorithmi came from an Arabic work based on Indian science, which included the number 0. Among the numerous access gates to the city, the most emblematic are the bisagra gates of the Sun and of the Cambron, reconstructed so they now look the same as in the Renaissance period. The primitive bisagra gate of Arabic origin communicated with the region of the Sagra to the north. In the 16th century, it is configured as we see it today by the architect Covarrubias on behalf of Carlos V, with an exterior gate with crenellated towers and an imperial shield of the double-headed eagle, and a courtyard where Portazgo taxes were collected. The inner gate, with towers of Nicolas de Vergara, preserves Muslim remains from the 10th century. The door of the Cambron, also Renaissance, is called that because of the cambroneras, or thorny plants that grow in the surroundings. In the Middle Ages, it was called the Jewish Gate, since it gave access to the walled Jewish quarter. The one we see was made in the 16th century. In the inner door, we see Herrerian towers with capitals and a sculpture of Saint Leocadia attributed to the sculptor Monegro. The exterior door shows the royal shield of Philip II with the unicephal eagle and two seated statues of Gothic kings on the sides.